Hello and welcome to the Outlaws at Thunder Junction limited set re-review. Today I will be reviewing myself, my own grades of the cards. Before the set came out, I made a bunch of grades. I looked at the cards and said, how good are these cards? How I think the format's going to play out. And today we're going to look at, what how I did, some cards I was right about, some cards I was wrong about, some macro stuff. Just as sort of like a good way to round out the format and kind of talk about, what went on, how did the format go, um, how did the format play out for me. So without further ado, let's just get right into it with some cards I was wrong about. I'm starting with the ones I was wrong about this time because those are the ones people actually want to hear about. Nobody cares about what I was right about. And we're starting off with a banger here, right? Like we're starting off with me being wrong about a Wrath, which is not the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last. I am a noted, you know, individual that doesn't like Wraths as much as the average limited player because they don't like. I just like to affect the like. I like to control the board, and Wraths disincentivize you generally from controlling the board. Um, the key thing about this Wrath, though, is that it doesn't do that. It allows you to play to the board in some capacity while also still, having your Wrath up, which is why it's so good. And also just having other modes, like the modality of it, I think I underestimated how good it would be to be this modal. The one thing I think I was right about with this card is that it being an instant basically didn't really matter. Like, it mattered in the sense that, like, you could protect your things, but the fact that the Wrath itself was an instant actually didn't really comprise a lot of equity in terms of like why this card was so good. Um, but yeah, it did matter. It did come up. Obviously, it's good that it was an instant, but I think that generally, if this weren't an instant, well, I guess obviously, if the Wrath part of it specifically wasn't an instant and the rest of the modes were, it would be similar. You know what I mean in terms of quality. But nitpicking aside, yeah, I just missed on this one because I thought 6 mana for Wrath is too much, even at instant speed, and then 7 mana you get to save your creature. You know, I was like, is that worth paying for? It is triple white. Triple white has a lot of costs associated with it, but it actually just turned out that it was definitely castable, and even if you had other bailout clauses that made it better. Second card I was wrong about, another mythic. We'll get to some other stuff later, but mythics are cards that I'm like more likely to be wrong about, drastically than commons because their power level set to set varies so much. Um, so we've seen these double down type effects before, and I kind of glossed over this card in the set review. I just kind of ignored it and said, "Oh, whatever. We've seen this, hundreds of times, and not hundreds of times, but we've seen these type of effects where it's like, oh, if you do a thing, you double your spell, right? Like there's like Vesubin, Duplimancy. There was like which might do something completely different, by the way. I'm not sure if that's the one that I'm thinking of. There's the zombie one from Midnight Hunt, where if you cast a zombie, it would double it, I think. And that card was terrible. This card, I kind of expected to be the same, but I think the key things that I missed, there were a couple of key things that I missed. One, this format is, you know, you could afford to play this card on turn 4 and you wouldn't just lose. If you played something on turn 4 in Midnight Hunt like this, you would pretty much just lose. So there was some context there. Like, this format was a little bit slower in terms of the board speed, as I like to call it. It wasn't slow in terms of game length, but it was slow in terms of board speed, which is sort of how, like, it's kind of like a different way of talking about format slowness. But in formats with less board reliance, cards like this are enabled. Also, the one thing about this is there were just a lot of big blue outlaws, which I didn't actually bother to check before grading this card. Partially because I was like, there's no way there's going to be like blue creature, like we're doing blue and we're doing like creatures, like that's not. But there was like Lone Shark worked with this. There's Peerless Rope Master, which was like a 4/4, and if you get two 4/4s for 5 mana, you're going to be pretty happy. Even if they don't do anything, like this card, there just was enough support around it that it definitely got there and was a really sweet build around. I did get the privilege of building around it one time. I don't think I ended up trophy. I ended up going like 5 wins with the deck, but whatever. I mean, it's not about the deck wins; it's about the card. Um, and it was a functional build around, which is always nice to see. So this one, I don't know what happened with this one. If we're gonna be honest, Outlaw Stitcher still a card that to me looks very good. Um, if we want to kind of go back and think about like why this card, because there's Prosperity Tycoon right in this set, which is a 4/2 that makes a 1/1, and that card has other abilities as well. This card you would think would be at least as good as that card, which was not the case in the aggregate. I do think that Alistair was fine, but just kind of doing like a deep dive on like this particular card not working is sort of a very interesting thing to think about. Just because it up front you're getting 3/6 worth of stats for 4 mana, spread across 2 bodies, which should be pretty good. But it turns out that a 1/4 is just like so bad. Like it's so bad that it doesn't really matter that you're getting like a lot of that stat. A lot of those stats are tied up in a 1/4, and a 1/4 is pretty board irrelevant in terms of like it can't really attack well. It doesn't threaten to block in the mid game because like as well it can like prevent you from losing life, but it doesn't threaten to like it doesn't prevent your opponent from attacking. I guess it's kind of a more nuanced way of saying it. It just kind of sits there and doesn't do anything. So yeah, Outlaw Stitch is a curious case of like what went wrong here. Part of what went wrong is the double spell stuff just really wasn't super functional. Like blue red wasn't super functional, but I do think there is some foundational problems with the card, and I think they should have pushed the plot for 4 instead of 5 button. I think that's what should have happened. To be honest with you. Another one, Blood Hustler, man. I mean, like I got a lot of stuff wrong. Let's talk, but there's a lot of cards I was wrong about in this set. This one is up there in terms of cards I was most wrong about. Um, so the thing about Blood Hustler that I didn't like in this set review, and you know, mostly still stand by that, but I would caution myself against it is, you know, cards that grow over time but are start pretty small do tend to be pretty bad. Like this archetype of card of like 2 mana 1/1 that grows to become a big thing tends to be pretty bad, but there were a couple of reasons why it was good in this format. One is that there wasn't any X1 hate really. There was not like Skullduggery existed, but it was actually actively bad to put in your deck. So because that card was bad, this card became better, and cards like this became better, where like you were just able to play cards that were small early, and then they would grow. And this was like another one of those things that like cards in this format were valuable because if they became real threats at some point during the game. It didn't really matter when they became real threats, unless you were playing against like green white and you were getting stomped on or whatever. This card not great against that, but that was a very small percentage of the meta. There was not a lot of decks that were just like stomping all over you. I do think there's the ability to draft those decks and whatever, but this card, when you're playing against any deck that's not trying to just kill you immediately, the card is 2 mana, maybe eat an opponent's removal spell, maybe not. But if it doesn't, like, you're threatening to just spend a bunch of mana, drain them out in the late game, and they have to do something about it. So it leaves you, offers you the opportunity to leave mana to do something productive. It grows with the course of the game. It works with a set mechanic that's really easy to trigger, multiple times, and just enables a bunch of stuff. So I think this card was definitely something I underrated and was a player in the format. Similarly, Hollow Marauder. Hollow Marauder, to be honest with you, I just misread the card. Like it was just a straight up like one of those things that happens in like preview season where like I don't like fully grasp what a card is doing when I read it sometimes. This was a case of that, but I do have to hold myself accountable, right? That just because I read it wrong, be like, oh, I read it wrong, so I don't have to whatever. But it was still a bad grade, right? Like I still graded the card poorly. The key thing that I missed is that this is like a 3 for 1. It just didn't process in my brain for whatever reason that I was like, okay, so you're like, yes, this is 7 mana, which it was like the things about this card that I was worried about actually came true, like at about the rate that I expected. Right, I was worried that this was going to be too like very expensive at a very high percentage of the time. I thought this was going to cost like 5.5 to 6 mana on average, and that's for the most part what it was costing. Now in some decks, obviously, if you have like really good self mill stuff, you could get it out on turn 4, turn 5, but that was rare and not super frequent. So I was worried about how many of these type of effects you could play. Were there other ways to do this? But at the end of the day, it's a late game threat that is threatening to win the game when it's on the board because it's just 4 damage a turn in the air, so your opponent has to deal with it somehow. And also, it's just getting you value, a lot of value up front, and like, yeah, it just gets you a lot of value up front, and people correctly or otherwise will hold the last card and whatnot, and it there was like ways to recur it too, which it just did quite a bit more than I was sort of expecting for a card that looks to be very expensive. I knew it was good. Like I knew the discount was there, but I still thought it was going to be really expensive. It was slightly cheaper than I thought, and did slightly more than I thought once it was in play. Biggest miss, not the biggest miss in terms of like gradation differences, but biggest miss from a concept standpoint. Like this was the easiest grade I gave in like the whole set review, was this putting Prickly Pear in tier 1. It was like the first grade I did. I saw Prickly Pear and I was like, alright, this card's messed up. And I think in a lot of formats it would have been, but you know, so red wasn't good in this format. It was the worst color for several reasons, but the primary reason that it was the worst color is that it wasn't fast enough. It didn't have an aggressive 2-drop that was beating down. There weren't good combat tricks to help it push damage. The mercenaries like could push damage in some instances, but a lot of times they just kind of made your opponent make trades that were bad for them, but like you couldn't compete on that axis over the course of the game. Like you weren't going to outvalue somebody by trading them with like mercenaries 1 for 1. They were just going to be able to outcard you, or eventually they'd play like a blocker that could block a thing, and then you're like, well, I guess I can't. Like this mercenary is just not doing enough. I do think the card's really good. I think in a vacuum it's incredibly strong. I just think that this format was especially hostile to Prickly Pear, and would I grade it the way I graded it again? Yes, I would. I would. But I think we have to, there is the mythos of the Dave Humphreys set, which of course this was, and I think that is something to keep in mind now. We look at red in those formats. Neon Dynasty, March of the Machine, this format. I forgot. I think there's one more in there. And it's been the worst color in those formats. Now, red and Neo was actually the best color if you drafted mono red, but if you're gonna draft a standard 2-color deck, red has been the worst color in each of those formats, because it just seems like for whatever reason, like the color just doesn't it doesn't mesh well with what the other colors are doing. So maybe just a note for next time. Next Humphreys set, we'll see if they figure it out. His team figures it out. And I don't think it's a failure that Prickly Pear is bad, or not bad, but not amazing. Like I don't think it's necessarily a failure. It just means the set's different, and the set was different. And we'll get to my grading of the set at the end. But it was just a different format, and there's nothing wrong with a different format. Next card I was wrong about is Rush of Dread. So Rush of Dread I put in tier 5 because I was like, look at how like it just seemed so expensive to me, right? 4 mana, target opponent sacrifices half their creatures rounded up. I was like, that's just not good. And then there was like 5 mana for them to discard half of their hand. It was just like it was just so much mana to do all these different things that like didn't actually like prevent, like you weren't getting their best stuff ever. But you and what ended up being true with this card is that you just kind of got enough Like it just did like enough in enough scenarios where like it was pretty good. Like I thought this would be unplayably bad, and it turned out that just like it was a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1 or whatever. And yes, you didn't get the 3 cards you wanted from your opponent, but man, you still got 3 cards, and like you were up, and it was going to be hard for them to pressure you if you made them sack half their board. And sometimes, the best case scenario for this was like your opponent sacrifices 2 creatures on a 3-creature board, and they discard like 2 cards from their hand. That was kind of like your best case scenario. The make them lose half their life. I did actually kill somebody with this today. Not really, but I did burn somebody up from 1 life with the loses half their life rounded up mode today, which was fun. But yeah, so you can do it, but that was kind of more of a meme than actually um, getting there. Um, but yeah, just having like it's versatile, but it's not in some ways, right? Where yeah, the card just kind of does more things than it looks like, and that was kind of a miss for me. Next, first green card, Trash the Town. I said we were gonna have a lot of cards I was wrong about because it's good to highlight these type of cards for like the future, right? So that I can maybe get them right next time. Copium. There's always something though. So Trash the Town is another spree card, and this one I misevaluated because I just thought that it was too like clunky. Like it was also 4 mana to draw 2 cards is great, and like put 2+1/+1 counters on something. Um, for 3 mana is like pretty like that effect has been bad in the past. Like the 2 counters on something for 3 mana has been bad, but just like the upside of like being able to like draw a card and like draw 2 cards, like 2 cards was kind of a lot, and like you were getting a 3rd card by like trading up with your opponent's creature or like eating their creature in a lot of cases, and then the +1/+1 counters stick around. Just a really big, threatening thing to do. Like if you play like if your creatures are larger than your opponent's creatures, they have to act first a lot of the time. And then Snakeskin Veil also helped out with this, where like you could cast this card without fear of getting obliterated if you had a Snakeskin Veil, which you know key part of the format makes combat tricks better. There wasn't really combat tricks in the format. This was kind of it. And this is like all the combat tricks look like this in this format. They're expensive or they don't exist, and that's kind of it. Like it's kind of a value combat trick, which is interesting. Slick Sequence is another card I was wrong about. Um, Slick Sequence really is in here to highlight blue red's place in this format as being the worst deck, a deck that I actually never drafted. I don't think like pure blue red. I don't think I ever did that. I don't know. Maybe I did somewhere along the way. But yeah, it just kind of turned out that a being forced to cast your spells in certain orders and at certain times is always a bigger cost than it looks like it is, because you just don't always have everything lined up perfectly. You can have like 90, you can be 90% of the way there on Slick Sequence, but if your opponent's creature has 3 toughness, like, too bad. You're just not casting the card, and then your whole plan just kind of falls apart. So, like, it's like if your opponent plays a 2/2, great. If your opponent plays a 3/3, well, guess you're out of luck for that game. Move on to the next game, right? So, it it does have that kind of problem with it, where it is too situational to draw the card. It is a gold card, so it's not easy to cast. It's 2 mana, but it's 2 different colors of mana. The plot stuff was good. There were some like cute things you could do with this. Yes, but it it doesn't. You know what I mean? It just doesn't do enough by itself to be like a reason to go into blue red. And I thought that it would have done that. So I was wrong about the deserts as well. Now I rated the deserts highly. I put them in tier 3. I said they were going to be average cards, which means that you should take them at an above average rate. I know that's kind of like a weird counterintuitive thing, but I when I rate lands, like lands and colorless cards are kind of like have this weird like place, or like I rate them in terms of their relative strength, but then I'm like, but you should probably pick them a little higher than I'm like actually rating them, because like they can go in more decks and fixing like So I rated them in tier three, and I probably should have rated them in tier two at the time. I obviously should have because they were better than I even imagined, and I thought they would be good. I thought they would be good, but they were just so great. They just did everything you wanted. You pretty much wanted them in every deck, because you were probably trying to splash something, or like if you weren't, you were doing desert stuff and wanted them, and they just enabled a lot and did a little bit of chip damage to your opponent, and they were just the best lands I think in the format. And now we're gonna move on to the cards I was right about after the long list of cards I was wrong about. The first card I was right about was Archangel of Tides, another mythic. Again, I don't want to spend like too much time on these because like they are mythics and they don't really matter that much. But there was a lot of hype for Archangel of Tides. I don't really get it. It was a reprint, I understand, but this card has kind of like all of the like it checks all the boxes in terms of like card that is going to be overrated by a large percentage of the population. And I graded it in tier three. It was basically a tier three card. The concerns that I had were all warranted. It turned out like triple 3 white mana symbols in your casting cost. Not having a real ETB. Yes, it maybe does some stuff on ETB, but not really because it has to be attacking to make stuff not be blockable. And it just kind of like if your opponent really wants to attack you, they're gonna do it, and maybe they will, maybe they won't. But like it just was too weird and situational and hard to cast, and all those things made it very medium. Consuming Ashes got it right. This one was easy to get wrong, and a lot of people did. A lot of people that fell into this trap. The people that you would expect, mostly to be right about more cards on average were wrong about Consuming Ashes at a higher rate. Because the card looks in some ways like a 4-mana removal spell that we've seen in the past that hasn't been very good. But sort of like the key difference is I made the comparison to the card in Dominaria United that was very strong and was, at the time, like before the set came out, people thought it wasn't going to be amazing because, double pip and, whatever instant. But that card exiled, this card exiled. It gives you a benefit if you exile something that's cheap. This also does that. That formula is really strong on your removal spell. I think this one is actually better than the other one because Surveil 2 is probably better than Gain 3 life. I don't know. It's situational, but I think this one's probably better. And I think it's better in this format because Exile mattered a lot in both formats because Graveyard Recursion was a big deal in Dominaria and also this format. But it's really easy if you're like a modern card evaluator to just say, removal spell that's like big and expensive and whatever. But a lot of people fell into the trap there of, exile removal, and just giving you like a removal spell that does give you something is always worth maybe a little bit more than you may think at times. And the format was also bomb heavy, so just having removal in your deck was better than average. So there was that feature as well. I got Vault Plunderer right too. So Vault Plunderer is just for Phyrexian Rager. I know people will tell you it's different. I couldn't find the differences. Honestly, I was unable to find the difference between the two cards. You know what I mean? Like, there's just, in terms of rating the cards, I don't think it's meaningfully different for them to be 3-1 versus 2-2. There are slight advantages in like either direction. Of like, yes, a 3-1 is probably slightly better, but there are cases and whatever. The 2-2s are better, and against against the tokens in the set and whatever. Like, there are certain ways to think about like which version is better. But it is the stereotypical card that is overrated by a lot of people early in a format because it looks very appealing. It looks like a very like old school, I'll play my 3-drop and it'll draw me a card and I'm gonna pay a life and whatever. I'm gonna be 2 for 1-ing. And it just that there were just other ways to do that and whatever. Still a good card, still playable. You're not gonna like ever really cut this card for the most part. It's good, but certainly not an all-star that some certain prognosticators believed that it might be, and I did not. I believed that it was going to be pretty average, and I think that's where it ended up being. Longhorn Sharpshooter. So this one is one that I don't know if I'm really like should be putting on the list in terms of things I was like more right about than the average person. But I think some people did overlook, saying, hey, paying 4 mana to deal 2 to something is too much. And I do think that mentality was prevalent. But, I do think, the 2-for-1 that it gave you and the fact that it, was plotting and doing stuff for you, it was a sweet card. It did a lot of cool stuff. I never drafted it really. I drafted it like twice total because I basically never played red um, in this format in best of one anyway. And it's a good, it's a really solid card in your deck, and you're always going to be happy to have it. And I think that there was just a little bit much hemming and hawing about oh man, 4 mana and you're gonna get 3/3 reach. Is that not enough? Turns out it's just enough. Dance of the Tumbleweeds. This was one that this style of card has historically been very bad, right? The 3 mana ramp spell in green, but they've been doing more lately to make it good. The one that investigated in Murders at Carlisle Manor. That card was a card that I played a couple of times and was solid. Not amazing, but solid. This card is better than that card because it makes an actual creature in the later game, but can also just be a ramp spell. But yeah, this just made a huge threat. Desert, like tutoring deserts was great if you had like a bucolic ranch in your deck. If you had a conduit pylons in your deck, this card got even better. Just finding any desert, fixing your mana, like it just did so much. And you really did want it. It does kind of exemplify the format in the sense that like you really did want to get the full value out of this card. Like if you cast it for not, and if you cast it and didn't make a 5 like an elemental, you were probably doing it wrong in most cases. So that's it's kind of a good way of thinking about the format. And finally, the last card I'm going to talk about being right about is Snakeskin Veil. I got Snakeskin Veil right. I don't know how much hate there was pre-format about Snakeskin Veil, but it ended up being one of the best green commons and just really strong. It was great in Kaldheim. I think it was even better in this format due to removal being so necessary and the rares being so good. It just was a complete blowout when your opponent had it. The best on it when the best way to play around a card is to play into it in most cases. That's how you know the card's kind of good. Like Snakeskin Veil is just kind of that strength of card where it's like opponents got to use their removal spell. Like if you have 1 mana up and they got a Mystical Tether and they don't have any other turn 3 plays, like they gotta do it probably. Like if you got a Giant Beaver in play, like they kind of just have to try to answer the Giant Beaver because they're just gonna lose. So it certainly has a lot of applications in this format. And now, without further ado, we're going to talk about my overall feelings on the format after I make sure that everything's on there. It's been confirmed, everything's on here. So I gave this set a 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 is fine. It's, I don't think it's, I think it's above average, basically is what I'm saying. I think this set is better than LCI. I think it is worse than Wilds of Eldraine, in my opinion. I think it's about the same as Lord of the Rings. Whatever. I mean, obviously, like your average set grade is probably going to be closer to like a 7 than a 5 if you're doing this. Whatever. That's. I like playing Magic. Obviously, 7 out of 10 or whatever. Like, I'm not going to try to like do that whole thing, but I think the set's good. Like good, but not great is kind of how I would categorize it. There's a lot of gameplay stuff. I really like the crime lands. I really thought crime was an interesting mechanic. Plot was also interesting, although maybe there could have been a couple of levers tweaked in a couple of places to help it out a little bit. I don't know. I'm not sure they 100% nailed it, but I do think it was good. I think the biggest problems I have with the format were the lack of graveyard interaction and just fixing being a little bit too good. I do like there to be fixing. Basically, I think Evolving Wilds is like the best. Like is really really good. Um, and I wish that more formats I think Evolving Wilds is the best way to do fixing in a limited format. Basically, is kind of the long and short way of saying it. Like I think that's the right way to do it. And there was Mirage Mesa, which I know is Evolving Wilds adjacent. It's not quite the same thing. I understand why they did it because it's a desert and they want desert stuff. But that being said, yeah, and it just there was a lot of recursion. It did there could in some games feel like you just kind of had no way out of what your opponent was doing. You were just kind of like in a lock essentially. Like your opponent plays on his Rutstein, and it's like, well, guess I'm just kind of dead. I don't really know what I'm gonna do. Um, but yeah, I think it was good but not amazing is kind of my format overview, and for that reason, I've given it a 7 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed the set re-review. I hope it was insightful in some way. I hope there was like whatever. I hope you'll join me for the next set review, which is coming up shortly. I may or may not be able to do one for uh, Modern Horizons because I'm away, so we'll see how that goes. It might just be like the worst quality video ever. That's fine. Nobody cares about the quality. Um, if you don't care about the quality of your content, you can show up and watch it. Watch that set review whenever I do it, if I do it even. And I'll see you then.